Have you heard the rumor that Iraq just decided to remove 3 zeros from the dinar, and people are already asking whether this means the currency is about to explode in value? Welcome back to Iraqi Dinar Brief, the channel that cuts through the noise and gives you the real story behind every dinar headline, without the hype and without the guesswork. Today we are breaking down one of the biggest currency stories coming out of Baghdad in years. So stay with us until the end because we are going to separate fact from rumor and rumor from scam. Here is what is actually happening right now. Iraq is facing a serious budget problem in 2026. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz disrupted oil shipping routes. And since oil is the backbone of Iraq's economy, government revenue took a hard hit, falling from around $6.8 billion in February to just $2.3 billion by May. That kind of drop puts real pressure on a government that needs to pay public sector salaries every single month. To cover the gap, Iraq's government has already started printing extra dinars, which works as a short-term fix but raises the risk of inflation down the road. So policymakers are now looking at other options. And one of those options is the long-discussed plan to remove 3 zeros from the Iraqi dinar. This is not a brand new idea. The Central Bank of Iraq first proposed deleting 3 zeros back in 2011, with the goal of simplifying transactions and fighting inflation. But that plan was shelved because of political instability, the war against ISIS, and falling oil prices. Now, more than a decade later, the debate is back on the table, and this time it is being driven by fiscal necessity rather than pure economic theory. So what would this actually look like in practice? Under the proposed plan, 25,000 dinars would become 25 new dinars. Every note in circulation would be converted at a fixed ratio, and the government has floated a 1,000-to-1 exchange for existing bills. This is called redenomination, and it is important you understand what that word actually means, because this is where a lot of confusion, and honestly a lot of scams come from online. Redenomination is a cosmetic change to a currency. It does not make anyone richer. If you had 100,000 dinars before the zeros are removed, and the exchange happens at 1,000 to 1, you would have 100 dinars after. And it would still buy exactly the same amount of bread, fuel, or rent that it did before. Nothing about your actual wealth changes. It is the same value, just written with fewer digits. Countries like Turkey, Brazil, and Zimbabwe have all done something similar in the past, mostly to make their currency easier to handle for accounting, banking, and everyday transactions, especially when the exchange rate against the dollar has gotten unwieldy. A currency trading at around 1,300 dinars to the dollar becomes harder to manage for international trade and reserve accounting, and removing zeros is one way governments try to clean that up. Now here is where this story gets interesting, and where you need to pay close attention. On a televised broadcast, Iraq's Minister of Communications, Mustafa Sanad, stated that the government's decision to redenominate the dinar and delete the 3 zeros is officially finalized. That is a strong statement from a sitting government official, and it made headlines fast. But here's the catch, and it is a big one. The Central Bank of Iraq, which is the actual monetary authority responsible for currency decisions, has not publicly confirmed any timetable. In fact, the minister's comments drew criticism from other officials and economists. Because currency policy in Iraq is supposed to run through the central bank and parliament, not through a single ministerial announcement on television. So what we have right now is a government official saying the decision is done, while the institution that actually controls the currency has stayed quiet. That gap between a bold public statement and official confirmation is exactly the kind of space where rumors thrive, and unfortunately where scams thrive too. If you have spent any time researching the Iraqi dinar online, you have probably come across so-called dinar gurus, websites, and social media accounts promising that removing the zeros will trigger a massive revaluation, sometimes called an RV, where your dinar holdings supposedly become worth many times more overnight. Let's be very clear and very direct about this. Redenomination and revaluation are two completely different things. Redenomination changes how a currency is displayed, removing zeros and adjusting the numbers on the notes. Revaluation would mean the actual exchange rate against other currencies, like the US dollar, changes significantly, making the currency worth genuinely more on international markets. Removing 3 zeros does not automatically cause a revaluation. These are separate decisions made through separate processes, and history backs this up. And in over 20 years, no sudden currency jump that some online promoters keep predicting has ever happened. Be skeptical of anyone online promising guaranteed, life-changing returns tied to Iraqi dinar exchange rates. Legitimate financial reform takes time. It goes through central banks, parliaments, and gradual implementation, not overnight announcements on social media. Now let's talk about the practical side, because there are real reasons Iraq might want to do this beyond just political messaging. A significant amount of Iraq's money supply, more than half of all currency in circulation, is estimated to sit outside the formal banking system, often held as physical cash rather than in banks. Some of that is ordinary people who simply prefer cash, but officials also believe a portion represents undeclared or hidden funds. Redenomination could push a meaningful share of that hidden cash back into the formal banking system, since old notes would eventually need to be exchanged for new ones through official channels. That gives the government both an economic incentive, modernizing the currency, and a financial transparency incentive, surfacing money that has been sitting outside the system. It also connects to Iraq's broader push toward things like digital payment infrastructure and reducing dependence on physical cash, which government advisors have been talking about as part of a wider economic restructuring effort. So where does that leave us on timing? Even the most optimistic statements from officials suggest implementation would not begin immediately. Reports citing government sources point to a possible start around 2027, and that assumes the plan moves from political discussion to an approved, funded, and logistically ready program, which includes printing new notes, training banks, and running a transition period where old and new currency circulate side by side. That transition period matters a lot because it is standard practice in every country that has done a redenomination. And it means people would have time to exchange their currency safely, rather than facing a sudden cutoff. So to bring this all together, here is the honest picture as of today. Yes, Iraq's government is seriously discussing removing 3 zeros from the dinar. Yes, a senior minister has publicly claimed the decision is finalized. But no, the central bank has not confirmed an official timeline. And no, this process, even if it happens, would not by itself make the currency worth more in dollar terms. If you are holding dinar or thinking about it, understand exactly what you are dealing with: a potential cosmetic currency reform driven by real fiscal pressure, not a guaranteed path to sudden wealth. That is the responsible way to look at this story, and it is the only way we are going to cover it here. We will keep tracking this closely, including any official statement from the Central Bank of Iraq, any parliamentary vote, and any concrete timeline that replaces speculation with fact. If you want reform news like this without the exaggerated promises you find elsewhere online, make sure you are subscribed to Iraqi Dinar Brief, because we will bring you the next update the moment there is something real to report. Thanks for watching, stay informed, and stay skeptical of anyone who tells you getting rich is guaranteed. We will see you in the next video.